Welcome to BeginEducator.com, and now we are continuing our issue of these argumentative, truth-seeking, logical papers. And we're going to go over issues, reasons, and conclusions. So let's just quickly overview from the last lesson. We're going to go about, for this lesson, we're going to go over some concepts to be learned. And one of these things is going to be, well, what is an issue? What do I mean when I say that? Then we're going to go over the conclusions to that issue, which are the right kinds of opinions. Remember in that last lesson, we kind of talked about how, well, everybody has opinions and aren't just facts and opinions. Opinions are what most people argue about. Then we're going to talk about reasons. Then I'm going to give you a little introduction to actually evaluating those reasons. And by evaluating, I mean you're kind of deciding whether or not these reasons are really good, or whether they're absolutely terrible, or whether you're laughing at them, or whether, you think that they're great and convincing. Now, what's the best way to learn about issues and conclusion? Well, imagine right now you are on a jury, and the prosecuting attorney has this to say at the end of the trial. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are ready to deliberate the case. I urge you to find Miss Scarlett guilty of the murder of Mr. Body. Do not forget these facts. First, Mr. Body was killed with a blunt object. You were presented with a lead pipe. Whose fingerprints were on it? Miss Scarlett's. Miss Scarlett insists that she was at a ball the night of the murder, but who witnessed her at the ball? No one. Furthermore, Mr. Body was ready to write Miss Scarlett out of his will. In light of that fact, Miss Scarlett had motive. Therefore, Miss Scarlett stands guilty before you today. Think about all the things I've just highlighted. I've highlighted a couple keywords for you. Maybe this one's familiar first. How about this one, though? Have you seen this one yet? In light of that fact? We'll be learning about that keyword later. There was also furthermore, and we had this right here. Why is this question being asked? Well, it's a rhetorical question. What's this person's opinion of Miss Scarlett? Ask yourself that right now. That she's guilty. So, the most important question that we're going to go over whenever we're reading something and we're asking questions is, what is the issue? Well, in this preceding example, the issue is this. Did Miss Scarlett murder Mr. Body? And how we answer that question is going to be the conclusion. Now, let me ask you this right now. When you're reading things that are, kind of argumentative, and by argumentative, I don't mean that they're fighting. I just mean that they're giving you reasons to believe something. Is the issue always going to be explicitly stated in writing? Sometimes it can be, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you have to kind of infer what the issue is and what they're talking about. They're not always going to explicitly state it. When you do your writing, you don't have to actually ask a rhetorical question in your introduction, but it is a good idea. But it's not always have to be there. It's not essential. But however it's written, it has to be clear enough so that everybody reading it knows what the issue is at hand. And you just think about that previous example. Was there any ambiguity about what that person was talking about? Oh, no. He was absolutely talking about not just Miss Scarlett, not just Mr. Body, but whether Miss Scarlett murdered Mr. Body. Now, when we talk about issues, these are always going to be phrased in a question, and there's basically kind of two kinds. The first off is we have what are called descriptive issues. And here are some examples. Do eating disorders afflict men and women equally? So, okay, do men suffer just as much from, eating disorders like bulimia, anorexia nervosa as women? Well, let's, is this a yes or no question? Maybe. Yes. No. We'll find out. Does music increase or decrease concentration? Hey, that's another yes or no question. What killed the dinosaurs? It's not a yes or no question, but it is still a descriptive issue question. Why does malaria plague Africa but not the United States? All right, that is not a yes or no question, but it's still a question. Who killed Mr. Body? It's really, really easy. So, what do all these have in common? Well, they're all trying to ask questions that will explain what is, was, or will be. That is an example of descriptive issues. We also have what are called prescriptive issues. Now, this isn't like, going to get medicine, I'm going to go get a prescription, but we'll find out what prescriptive means in this context in a minute. Should we repeal sugar tariffs? Well, that means, should we stop taxing people when they want to come from foreign countries and bring in sugar to the United States? What is the best age to begin voting? Well, we know what it is now, but what this is asking is, well, what should it be? What really is the best age to begin voting? How can we address the high cost of education? Very broad question. Well, we already know that education is becoming very expensive, so how do we deal with this issue? What is the best way to cure malaria in Africa? Hey, we already know that there's lots of malaria in Africa, so now how do we cure it? Does Miss Scarlet deserve the death penalty? Ooh, well, we already decided Miss Scarlet's guilty, so now we got to decide whether or not she deserves the death penalty. So, what's the difference between a prescriptive issue and a descriptive issue? Well, prescriptive issues talk about how things should be, and how ought things to be. Does Miss Scarlet deserve the death penalty? Well, we already have described her as guilty, so now we're going to look at maybe a future course of action and, decide whether or not she deserves a death penalty. Should we repeal sugar tariffs? There's no question that we have these right now, but we're trying to decide whether or not they should exist. So now that we've kind of, framed these questions, we have all these questions, sugar tariffs, whether or not who killed Mr. Body, malaria in Africa, etc. We need to kind of figure out what the author's conclusion is to these questions that could be explicitly stated or not. So, what is the author's conclusion? Here's my example. Miss Scarlet killed Mr. Body with the lead pipe in the conservatory. There's the conclusion. Real easy. They are answers to the question at hand. They are answers to the issue. Now, should you, in your own writing, explicitly state your conclusion? Yes. In the first paragraph and as part of your thesis, you should have your answer to the issue when you're writing an argumentative paper. Make no mistake, if you do not state your conclusion, you are going to leave readers very confused most of the time. Very clever people can write a persuasive and argumentative essay without stating their conclusion, but that's very rare. Please don't try that for your first time. Now, we already know that conclusions are answers to questions, but what I kind of want to ask you now is, are conclusions opinions? And let's go back to the last lesson and review some of the opinions I gave you. Our prison system is the most overcrowded and corrupt in the free world. What's the issue? Well, our prison systems overcrowded and corrupt. What does this author think? This author thinks yes. Is this an opinion? The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, needs to be clarified for the modern world. Okay, what's the issue? How should we use the Second Amendment in the modern world? Is this an opinion? The more we support family farms, the better our food will become. Okay, so what's the issue? Well, it's about family farming and about the food that we grow from it. So is this an opinion? So conclusions really are opinions, aren't they? But there's kind of a difference between, just bad opinions and good opinions. And we're going to qualify the word opinion, and then we're going to better understand what makes the difference between a conclusion and kind of a silly opinion that, is like deciding whether or not you want to have, chocolate or vanilla. If the opinion could be described as thoughtful, researched, reasoned, fact-checked, supported, etc., we would call that a good opinion, and we'd probably say this is a very nice conclusion. But what if it's irrelevant? What if it's, chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? Or what if it's subjective? Something like saying, I like koala bears better than I like, teddy bears. Well, that's very subjective. That's just your personal opinion. What if it's completely silly? And what if it's thoughtless or unquestioned or unsupported? We call those mere opinions. don't really think of those as conclusions because, well, nothing, that means the person's not arguing for them and they're not giving you any good reasons to believe them. We would call those mere opinions, and those would be the kinds of opinions that hopefully you're not going to be writing anymore. So, Neil Brown says in a book called Critical Thinking what conclusions really are. And this is so important, I'm going to read it. Conclusions are inferred. They are derived from reasoning. Conclusions are ideas that require other ideas to support them. Thus, whenever someone claims that something is true or ought to be done and provides no statements to support his claim, that claim is not a conclusion because no one has offered any basis for belief. Please, go ahead and just read this again for yourself. Pause the tape, do whatever you can until this really sinks in. There's a big difference between giving a conclusion, which is a thought-out, carefully reasoned opinion, and saying something like, I like koala bears better than I like teddy bears. So how in reasoning do you find a conclusion? And how would you present it when you're actually writing your own papers? I'm going to read through a couple things and we're going to find the conclusions together. So first off, let's think about the question and what the topic of this might be. Let us talk about American prison systems. Is there a big clue as to giving you what this person's going to be talking about next? The United States imprisons only about 1% of its population. This may sound like little, but this is more than any other first world nation. Furthermore, many people are jailed for long periods of time for minor offenses, such as the possession of marijuana. Additionally, our prison systems are reluctant to release inmates not for moral or legal reasons, but for financial ones. Hence, American prison systems are both overcrowded and shamelessly corrupt. There's a big clue here and a big keyword that's giving you this person's conclusion. And it's this word right here, hence. Somebody might also say something like therefore or because of all this. This right here, this last sentence, that is a conclusion. By the way, can you see where the reasons for this conclusion are? In my opinion, eating meat is both immoral and unhealthy. Well, here's another paragraph, and it starts off with a sentence. Now remember, conclusions are opinions, so do you think that this person has given you their conclusion right away at the beginning? We got a nice keyword here. And now I think that we can see that this is a person's conclusion. Don't be afraid to use words like, in my opinion, if you're presenting a conclusion in your own writing. So, one of the most important things when you present your conclusion is make sure it's part of your thesis in your writing. When you're writing the argumentative paper, your thesis is your conclusion. And if it's not stated in your thesis, people are going to wonder what your conclusion is. And here are some keywords that you can use in order to present your conclusion. You can say words like therefore, thus, hence, it follows that, shows that, indicates, proves that, suggests that. In my opinion, the point is. These are all kind of keywords that a lot of authors use when they're giving their conclusion. Don't be afraid and absolutely use them to make your thesis very clear and your conclusion very clear. Now, reasons. What are reasons? Or where are the reasons? So here's a quick example going back to the beginning of the lesson. Miss Scarlett's fingerprints and Miss Scarlett's motives. Well, those were reasons for what conclusion? That Miss Scarlett is guilty. So the reasons are why the author holds their opinions or conclusions, and they support the conclusions. Remember what Brown said, conclusions are ideas that are supported by other ideas. So Miss Scarlett being guilty is supported by the fact that Miss Scarlett had motive. Now, you're really smart, and I bet you can figure this one out on your own. If your conclusion is your thesis, where are you going to put your reasons? Well, reasons support a conclusion, so what supports a thesis? Major supporting details. Those paragraphs, those body paragraphs are going to be supporting. and those are going to be your reasons. So let's go ahead and just go through this previous example, or where we have, in my opinion, eating meat is both immoral and unhealthy, where we know the conclusion right away. Let's read through this real quick and figure out how this author presents their reasons. First, let's think about health. Wait, first. That's a great little keyword there, isn't it? It's already giving us one idea, and health is one of the reasons why immoral. Let's see. Let's keep reading. One study found that heavy meat eaters frequently suffer heart disease. Would you call that a major or minor supporting detail? It's probably a minor supporting detail. In addition, how meat is processed is bad for our nutrition. Okay, is this a new reason, or is this still a minor supporting detail? I'll let you decide. But what about moral reasons? Wait, but, that's one of those contrast keywords that we use when we're kind of changing gears and changing subject. What about moral reasons? It's a rhetorical question. So, for one thing, animals can feel pain. Anything that can feel pain is morally important. Aha! So, I think that we've found both of these reasons. And right here, we got this other keyword here. That is letting us know that we got that other major supporting detail, or in this case, that other reason for this conclusion. Eating meat is both immoral and unhealthy. So, when you present your reasons, present them as major supporting details and use these other examples as minor supporting details. You will be using all of the keywords that you would normally use in the 5-paragraph essay or according to the pattern of organization that you are using. Here are some additional keywords that you can use to make your reasons very, very clear. Because of, since, in light of, in addition, is supported by, the study found that. All kinds of keywords that you can use in phrases that will let you know that a reason is coming. So, we're going to be going over what makes a good reason and what makes a bad reason. But first off, let's talk about the kinds of reasons. We'll be going over these in much more detail in the next lesson, but here's a quick sample. Remember, there's this thing called empirical evidence, and that's, scientific data. That's the most common kind of empirical evidence. Scientists love empirical evidence, as do lawyers who are trying to prove that Miss Scarlet killed Mr. Body. But also we have this thing called witness testimony. That just means somebody else saw something you didn't, or somebody else knows something that you didn't. I mean, for instance, there's probably a lot of science that you trust because a scientist said so. I'm kind of gathering that most of you probably aren't PhDs and you haven't done your own medical research, but you do trust, kind of the experts and the witnesses who did perform certain scientific experiments. Also, statistics. Statistics are just a collection of numbers that show a trend. So if I said something like, the price of college tuition has gone up 200% over the last 10 years, that is a statistic. We also have logical appeals. And remember, this is kind of, that rational side of the brain. That idea that, not everything is just senses. It's also how you think about certain things. We got consistency. Is this idea? Is it consistent with other things I know? And we also have probability and possibility. You might be looking at two options and you have to decide, well, they both, have data and they both have science behind them. So what's more probable and what's actually possible in the first place? Finally, there are these things called deductions. And in the next lesson, we are going to go over deduction after deduction after deduction. And you'll understand better what a deduction is later. Now, we're ready to start evaluating reasons. And here's your quick sample. Now, what makes a conclusion better than silly opinion? Well, of course, it's the reasons. But are all reasons equally good? You already know the answer, but I'm going to give you an example of really, really bad reasons in just a minute. Let's go back to that jury trial, and let's pretend we're on the jury again, but now, here's the closing statement by the prosecutor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are ready to deliberate the case. I urge you to find Miss Scarlet guilty of the murder of Mr. Body. Do not forget these facts. First, Miss Scarlet has suspiciously black hair. every movie villain has black hair. What does that make Miss Scarlet? Second, Mr. Body was killed with a blunt object. We know Miss Scarlet played baseball once, so maybe she killed him with a baseball bat. Also, Mr. Body danced horribly with Miss Scarlet. In light of that fact, Miss Scarlet had motive. Therefore, Miss Scarlet stands guilty before you today. Raise your hand if you think that these are good reasons. What makes them bad reasons? Why is this silly? So, are all reasons equally good? No. Well, remember, what makes something true is either empiricism and rationalism, but we're going to see what makes them better in the next lesson. So now, it's time for your assignment. Your first assignment is actually to self-reflect. You will be critically examining your own reasons. So, read over those paragraphs from the last lesson. What were your opinions, and do you feel like you have good reasons for them? Just read through your reasons. You can change your mind. It's totally acceptable to change your mind. In fact, if you never change your mind, you never are learning. So please, look over your reasons and really ask yourself, are these good reasons? And what will help is I want you to imagine that you hold the opposite opinion. So, what reasons would you give to hold the opposite opinion? This is very, very important for later on when we're actually writing our argumentative essay and we learn to anticipate objections. The next thing you're going to do is kind of do a little bit of research and go do your own reading assignment. You need to go to any online magazine or news agency and read something called an editorial or an op-ed article. Op-ed stands for opinion education. And these kinds of articles are attempting to persuade you of something. They're attempting to argue and convince you of a specific point, and they are talking about a specific issue. So, well, what kind of issue? You will tell me what kind of the issue is, and what's the author's conclusion, and what are the reasons. And there's all kinds of examples of places you can go to find editorials and op-ed articles. You can go to Time, you can go to CNN, you can go to IBD.com, Reuters, The Economist, Yahoo News, you name it, you can find it. You've already done this kind of research, so I know you can look for it. If you want just something really, really easy, trust me, Time magazine is still pretty easy to read. So, make sure you do that, do a little self-reflection, read an editorial, read an argument, and you'll be ready for the next lesson when we really, really get down to the nitty-gritty of critical thinking. Thanks again for usingeducator.com.